From the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. We hope that you and your family are sheltering in place in a comfortable environment, and we look forward to greeting you back in our beautiful grill room just as soon as conditions permit. In the meantime, we're going to keep using Zoom technology to bring you presentations of fascinating people that have any kind of potential connection to the sea. In this particular case, we have a presentation from a fascinating Stanford professor on the subject of making movies about and under the sea. Margaret Cohen is a professor of English, French, and comparative literature at Stanford University. And she's also the Andrew B. Hammond Chair and scholar of the Blue Humanities at Stanford. You may be asking yourself, what role has film played in connecting audiences with the remote undersea, and how has curiosity about underwater realm inspired new film technologies and memorable cultural fantasies? Margaret will review the fascinating history of underwater filmmaking and its impact on both the aesthetics of movies and public perception of the oceans, which is the subject of her latest book, The Underwater Eye, which is published also by Princeton Press. Among her many publications, Margaret is the author of the award-winning monograph, The Novel in the Sea. She is also the general editor of the 6th volume, Fascinating, A Cultural History of the Sea. Margaret, welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Thank you, Ron. It was such a pleasure to be here with you, and I wish we could be here together in person, but we're working on that, I guess, all of us. And thank you for the opportunity to share my research about the sea, which has spanned the past 2 decades of my career at Stanford. So I've had a rambling career. I started out working on surrealism. That got me back through a very important German Jewish critic of surrealism named Walter Benjamin, got me back into the archives of 19th century Paris. And then I wrote a book about the history of sentimental fiction, and that got me back into forgotten literature. And then that took me to novels about the sea and writing about the sea in the age of global sail and writing about work at sea in particular. And so my book, The Novel in the Sea, is about how the heroism of work at sea in the age of sail shaped the development of the modern novel from Defoe to Conrad. And once I was launched into that realm, I didn't look back. I love the water. I surf on the side, so any chance I have to kind of get into the water or get to the water is good for me. So then I started looking at what followed the celebration of topside heroism, and I was interested in novels that might have to do with the underwater realm. And it turned out that Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was kind of a one-off, and that really the great works about the underwater realm works in film.
How often have you been sailing?
So I grew up sailing sunfish around Long Island, just like puttering around in small boats. And every so often I've had a chance to crew, but my knowledge is mostly from books.
You're a college professor at a renowned university. Give us a day in the life of, or a week in the life of a college professor at Stanford.
I teach 2 or 3 days a week, depending on the schedule. And you might think that the teaching load is pretty light since I'm in the classroom maybe for 4 hours on each of those days. But in fact, the preparation takes up a lot of time, and then a lot of time is taken up with advising and then with administering the university. It's kind of seasonal work. When I'm at school, it's kind of nonstop 24/7, and then in the summers I get to do research. And this book came out of research I did at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, research I did at the Musée Oceanographique in Monaco. I did a little bit of research at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute.
And when your classes, are these fine art students? Are these liberal arts students?
So it really depends. When I teach, I'm teaching a required course in English, which is largely students who are humanities students, with a couple of students who are double majors, like in econ and English or computer science and English. When I teach a graduate course that I love to teach called Imagining the Oceans, I get marine biology students, earth systems students, along with art history students and English and literature students. And then we have some pretty interesting dialogues which stretch us across disciplinary boundaries. And it's a very interesting and challenging stretch and a rich one. I'm going to start by just putting on a PowerPoint with a couple of my books, and then I'm going to go into my subject. So thank you for reviewing my publications. I just put a few of the covers of my sea books up so you could see how they feel. Another book along with that I've co-edited is The Aesthetics of the Undersea. That was a prelude to the work I'm going to talk about with you today, The Underwater Eye, how the movie camera opened the depths and unleashed new forms of fantasy.
Thanks for these images. On the second from the left, it says, A Cultural History of the Sea in Antiquity. Tell us about that graphic on the cover, the boat over a red background. Talk about that, please. Where'd that come from? This is one of your 6 volumes.
Yes, this is an image that comes from an attic cup that's actually in Munich of the god Dionysus crossing the sea with dolphins from antiquity.
Wow. How old is that image?
That image dates to 500 BC.
Wonderful. Fascinating.
So the subject of the emergence of the undersea and its representation in film was really quite remarkable to study because I was able to see how much the human imagination plays a role in shaping our perception and understanding of the world's physical environment. Now, the depths were almost entirely inaccessible across most of human history, and that started to change in the middle of the 19th century with the takeoff of salvage diving and dive engineering in the industrialized nations of the world. This ability to film underwater dates to 1912, when American J.E. Williamson invented the photosphere, a submersible that enabled underwater filming where the camera operator was enclosed in a chamber of air. And there's a lot of interesting maritime engineering history around this. Williamson designed it around material and technology used for repairing the bottom of ships and looking into what was causing leaks, and realized that he could put a camera operator in there. And this is an image from Williamson's book about his technology, where you can see the camera operator filming, of course, the ever charismatic subject of sharks. In 1914, Williamson assembled the footage taken from the photosphere and released the first documentary that was shot underwater, shared initially with scientists and then distributed more widely under different titles, such as Terrors of the Deep and 30 Leagues Under the Sea, and the film had extraordinary public uptake. My book explores how film played an immense role, not just in exhibiting, but in shaping our vision of the submarine realm. And an important realization of my study is that in revealing a realm that, since the dawn of human history, has not been extensively observed nor depicted, that artistic imagination figured so prominently. The depths were, and indeed still are, inaccessible to the majority of audiences. And these audiences have very few preconceptions for such novel scenes, and creators have immense creativity in how to shape their imagery. It's not like representing Paris, for example, where, you have reference points like the Eiffel Tower. Here, creators really could do what they wanted and didn't need to draw on pre-existing reference points. And what was so dramatic to me as I studied the history of how film was shot underwater was that although they didn't need to draw on pre-existing reference points, they did. And that in order to make audiences feel at home in this remote and inaccessible realm, they drew on artistic imagery that pre-existed discovery of the underwater realm and its capture in film, and also at the same time combined that with novel views to extend how people imagine their blue planet and also to extend the realm of the human imagination. What I want to do today is to show you 2 of what I call liquid fantasies that were created on the underwater film set. That's what I call filming underwater, from a revolutionary era in underwater film, which dates to the Second World War. Before that, the camera operator was largely enclosed, as in this William photosphere, behind glass, whether from a photosphere, from a tank, or from other technologies that were invented at the time. But in the late 40s and early 1950s, some of the result of the Second World War and underwater activities there, as well as in increasing curiosity about the undersea, led to the invention of a number of technologies that were really helpful for underwater filmmaking. And they included swim films, masks, scuba, and film innovations such as the portable camera. So here is an image of revolutionary portable camera, the Aquaflex, which was fitted with detachable wings and rudders, and which I've shown you in an illustration from a volume entitled Navy Frogman. The camera, its operators and actors were then free to roam around beneath the surface, and they vastly expanded both the action and the marine environment it was possible to stage. So the first convention that I want to show you comes from The Silent World, which was directed, as you probably know, by Jacques Cousteau, but you may not know or may have forgotten that it was also co-directed by Louis Malle, the great art house director, who was to go on to a celebrated career with such films as Murmur of the Heart, Atlantic City, La Combe Lucien, and many more. I put up a slide of his filmography. Malle was a student in his early 20s at the prestigious National French Film School when he got a summer job as a cameraman with Cousteau, and he learned to dive and then dropped out of film school to finish The Silent World. It was it was a good move. Malle was 24, and together with Cousteau, The Silent World won the prestigious Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, and it's one of the only 2 documentaries ever to win this award. So Cousteau and his fellow divers were the first to understand what Cousteau called l'ivresse des grandes profondeurs, which translates as usually rapture of the deep, but a more literal translation of ivresse is intoxication. The divers of the Calypso understood that when using compressed air at depths below 130 feet, and the depth varied according to the physiology of the individual diver, gases in the air supply, such as nitrogen, which are usually inert at the surface, are released in the bloodstream of the diver, and they cause the feeling of a high that impairs judgment. So I want to show you now how The Silent World shows these depths where divers start to suffer from rapture of the deep. And I want to then, in a technical way, explain how Cousteau, and probably with the input of Malle's great knowledge of cinema up to that point, drew on film noir conventions to stage this zone that had never before been shown on film. The English voiceover is a little bit less melodramatic than the French. You'll hear the colors become warmer as they go deeper, but in fact the French is, the further they descend, the more violent the reds become. So the film shows this dive as an exceedingly dangerous plunge into a zone where, again, to cite the more dramatic and expressive French, one should not go lower, one should not stay long, and it's intoned in a very lugubrious manner.
Depth gauges to establish the zones in which the different species live. The colors become warmer as they go deeper. "200 feet down, they enter the world of rapture, where compressed air steals a man's reason and the coral takes on nightmare shapes. Now we are 247 feet beneath the sea. This is the deepest shot ever taken by a cameraman. We must not stay here long. Our brains are fogged, and fatal dreams are coming. Up we go, our heads clear, and the beauty of the reef unrolls before the light.
So this is the deepest shot, the narrator tells you, that's been filmed underwater. And how is it organized? Well, it turns out it's organized drawing heavily on the conventions of film noir. So to create an ominous mood, film noir plays up contrasts between light and shadow using an imbalanced lighting system, in contrast to the more balanced mix of three-point lighting in realistic film. And I've taken a screen grab to show you this from Charles Laughton's classic black and white Night of the Hunter from 1955, where you can see such contrast between shadow and light used to create a sense of ominous foreboding, and this is throughout film noir. Such contrast is particularly interestingly meshed with the deep undersea because it's suitable for filming in low light conditions, where only a small portion of the scene can be illuminated. And so that is then suitable for visiting this world of rapture, where there's camera very close to what's being shown. The artificial lighting needed in the depths further has a harsh quality that accords with the harsh lighting used in the contrasts of film noir, as you could see from the Laughton screen grab. In Night of the Hunter, such high contrast depends, of course, on the clear focus possible in the atmosphere of air. and relatedly, the stark shadows it's possible to create, in contrast to the pervasive haze of the underwater atmosphere. But the haze can also be used to create discomfort, and this is something well known to painters across the history of art, that obscurity creates a sense of terror. So here's one more image from Night of the Hunter, where the audience is going toward the stream where Harry Powell, played by Robert Mitchum, throws the body of the murdered Willa, played by Shelley Winters. And you can see the nighttime fog after the murder with sinister trees and light glaring through the mist. As you can see in the screen grab with the mist, another technique of film noir is to use foreground obstruction or shadows that contrast with an open, unobscured view of the subject matter. Such a view undermines spectators' confidence that they grasp the whole picture intellectually as well as perceptually, and it also meshes well with the shallow depth of field achievable in the underwater depths. So I put up a slide where you can see what was actually quite remarkable in The Night of the Hunter, a scene shot underwater, where Willa's body is discovered in the stream. And in the foreground, you have the obstructions of some type of underwater seaweed, which is similar to the coral in the foreground in the world of Rapture that is so ominous. Throughout film noir, as The Night of the Hunter exemplifies, such techniques as imbalanced lighting and visual obstruction create a sense of people's violent personalities and twisted motives. In the silent world, the techniques are used to suggest the danger of rapture to the divers. But I also want to just draw your attention to the fact that this is not the only way to present the underwater world at 200 feet below the surface. So here is an image from a photographer who was on Cousteau's expedition while he was filming, named Louis Martin, who was a National Geographic staff photographer. And he published a long article about Cousteau in a 1956 National Geographic, so the same year that The Silent World appeared. And he presents this zone at 200 feet as a zone of luminous glowing fish, accompanied by a quote from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Kubla Khan, which is an opium dream, through caverns measureless to man down to a sunless sea. So for Martin and for the National Geographic presentation, this depth of 200 feet was not a zone of horror, but rather a zone of a pleasurable drug trip. So that's another way to show such a deep sea environment.
So essentially, what are we looking at? Are we looking at fish, and what are those white tentacles?
Those are a kind of invertebrate called sea whips, which the caption tells you is a low-order animal related to the sea fan. And the picture makes them seem quite mystical.
And ominous, right, I got it.
I want to show you a third way that you might represent the zone of the depths, just to give you the sense that there is not one way to represent this physical environment, and it's so malleable and so available to the creators. And this comes from the TV series Sea Hunt, which was the greatest fictionalization of the undersea in the revolutionary decades of the 1950s. Sea Hunt premiered in 1958, and it ran for over 4 years. And in 1959, TV Guide called it one of the most popular syndicated TV shows in the history of television. And I think it was one of the most popular TV shows until Baywatch, in fact. And the series writers had picked up on the general curiosity about this new planetary frontier in the post-World War II era and the many activities pursued there. Now, Sea Hunt was notorious for a number of errors when it came to diving. For example, its hero, Mike Nelson, dived alone, which was in violation of the buddy system. But when it came to portraying the underwater environment, there were a lot of scientific errors. And the producer, Ivan Tors, told TV Guide, people never notice scientific errors. When a portion of an episode set in the Hudson River was shot off Catalina Island and a barracuda, strictly a warm water fish, swam between Lloyd Bridges and cameraman Lamar Boren in the big scene, Tors said he decided that $15,000 to take out one fish is nonsense. There's a lot of fantasy along with the interest in the new frontier. Rather than distortion and intoxication in this depths, when you get down there in Sea Hunt, the show emphasizes the power of the divers. And this occurs in an episode called Rapture of the Deep, where Mike Nelson is put in charge of hiring divers to mine a fictional underwater mine for beryllium. So beryllium, obviously speaking to the virility of the miners there, at a depth of 170 feet. And I'm going to play you a clip there where you see how the emphasis is on Nelson's problem solving when a diver succumbs to raptures of the deep, and the heroism possible there given its challenges rather than its horror or its drug-like beauty.
The first two divers began working at a good steady pace without hurry. The water gave the rocks a certain amount of buoyancy, and I felt pretty hopeful that both of them may qualify. But working at a great depth, breathing compressed air for a prolonged time plays tricks on the mind. And one of the divers suddenly forgot one of the safety rules of diving. Look first before you reach into dark holes, or you may tangle with the vicious teeth of a moray eel. When molested, these babies attack ferociously with powerful jaws and sharp teeth which slant inwards. Suddenly the eel struck, fastening its teeth in his hand like fish hooks. Killing the eel proved to be a tough job, and prying those jaws loose was even tougher. The wound was bleeding badly, so I quickly improvised a tourniquet. This man had forgotten an important safety regulation. It was obvious that he was affected by rapture of the deep. He didn't meet our safety standards, and we were still short of at least one diver.
So there you can see it's Mike Nelson's heroism that's emphasized and his can-do ability to problem solve and improvise a tourniquet. So my point in showing these diverse shapings of the undersea is that art and the imagination play a really powerful role in how we imagine physical reality. And this shaping can have an impact, this is what I want to say in the second half of my presentation, on how we relate to that physical reality. And I want to show you the downside as well as the creativity to that impact by taking another liquid fantasy that I consider in my book, which is the fantasy of monsters from the deep, and showing how Spielberg created a horrific image of the shark in Jaws. Now, this horrific image of the shark goes back to a fear of the unknown, of what's below the water's surface that we can't penetrate with our eyes. That was first sensationally used by Jack Arnold in the grade B horror film Creature from the Black Lagoon. And I'm going to show you the swimming scene there where the filmmaker plays on the contrast between the obscurity of what you can see from the surface of what's going on below, and then what the camera, now that it can descend into the depths, can reveal. And this is the scene where Kay, the scientist's assistant, is going for a swim in beautiful tropical waters, and she is being stalked by the creature.
This was a huge movie in its day, huge.
Yeah, it's Now, Steven Spielberg was quite inspired by this scene in Jaws, where he amplified the contrast between the seemingly calm surface, where you can't see what's going on below, and then the depths peopled with an underwater monster. And he takes this from just one scene, as it was in Creature from the Black Lagoon, and it turns into the entire premise of the movie. And in fact, it's quite remarkable that the viewpoint of the monster, the shark, doesn't really get associated with a body. You don't see the shark until it surfaces at the hour mark of the film. So he's playing up this fear of the unknown that lurks in the depths by not even showing you what it is. I'm going to just show you a bit of the opening scene where you'll see the visual echoes of Creature from the Black Lagoon, but the viewpoint is intensified by not seeing the creature that it belongs to. This is Chrissy, who's gone for a swim at dawn.
Take it easy. Take it easy.
So I could say a lot more about Jaws and the horror techniques of it, and I'd be glad to talk that with you. But my main point is that with Jaws, Spielberg amplified that contrast between the obscurity of the surface and then what's going on in the depths into the subject of an entire film that then went on to a long lineage of, bigger and bigger sharks and more horror situations. So this is, I think, to the point of absurdity. This was the 2018 The Meg. I have put a picture of. I don't know. Have you seen it, Ron? It's
No, I didn't know about it. So at age 29, Spielberg already understood how to play this sort of like what was once thought of as film noir, dramatic effect underwater.
Yeah, and in fact, across my book, there are two filmmakers in the late 20th century who emerged as the great masters of using the underwater. And one is, you might not be surprised, James Cameron. And the other, which was a surprise to me, is Steven Spielberg. And while Cameron creates a sense of mystery and awe about the depths, Spielberg uses film noir and horror conventions to create a sense of terror. And that goes from Jaws to the underwater sequence that opens Saving Private Ryan, to a sequence in AI, to Minority Report. There are always terrifying uses of the underwater in Spielberg. I want to wrap this up by showing you the impact that the Jaws fantasy has on documentary film and how people imagine the Blue Planet, to take the title of the TV series that I'm going to use as my example. So that, in other words, liquid fantasies invented on the underwater film set have the power to shape how general audiences imagine the remote blue reaches of our planet. I don't think you can get a more influential example of recent documentary than Blue Planet 2, which was a sequel to the BBC's popular 2001 The Blue Planet, and it was first screened in 2017 in the fall. When it debuted in the UK, it became the most viewed program of 2017, with an audience that made up 20% of the UK's population. And according to an article in Slate, Blue Planet 2's success wasn't limited to its country of origin either. In China, the premiere drew about 80 million viewers and broke the internet in the process. Blue Planet 2 entranced audiences with the beauty and variety of marine life and habitats, and then, as you know if you've seen it, it warns you about the effect of the Anthropocene on the oceans, with an emphasis on plastic pollution and fossil fuel emissions. Now, I'm going to show you a sequence from the enthusiastically received premiere of the series, which is the segment on the giant trevallies. Now, the trevally segment exhibits an aspect of these fishes' behavior that had hitherto only been rumored among fishermen, and certainly never before captured on film. This behavior was a giant trevally's ability to take down a bird in flight. To capture this behavior, it took the Blue Planet producers and filmmakers 2 years, and a $100,000 Phantom Flex, a 4K digital camera capable of filming 1,000 frames a second.
Those just starting to learn to fly use the shallow lagoon that occupies the center of the atoll as their training ground. It's difficult for some of them to stay aloft for long. Giant trevallies. Usually, they are solitary hunters, but about 50 of them have come here from neighbouring reefs, attracted by this abundance of potential prey. The fledglings stay out of the water if they can. They even drink on the wing. If the trevally are to catch one now, they have to up their game. So there is a fish here that, amazingly, has a brain capable of calculating the airspeed, altitude, and trajectory of a bird.
So I could break down this sequence and show you a number of echoes of Jaws. You've got the trevally dorsal fin, you have the shots at the waterline, you have the thrashing with the white water, you have this unnatural ability of the monster to transgress its natural element and come out into air. My point is that here you have the documentation of a creature which is super interesting and prized by fishermen, and it's being framed according to the horror conventions of Jaws. So I just want to point you in concluding to the way in which this is fun, and I could also give you a bunch of quotes after the trevally sequence where people, it was right out at Halloween, people said, you know, if you want to go as a Halloween costume, why not dress up like a giant trevally? But it also has damaging effects on how we perceive ocean reality. And in particular, shark biologists today are working to combat the shark Jaws myth and to create an image of sharks as majestic predators who are part of our blue planet rather than terrifying creatures who need to be eradicated, as sharks today are subject to overfishing and as they play such an important role in the ocean food chain and in ocean health. So I have a colleague at Stanford named Barb Block who is actively working on this, and this is just a still from a film she's made called Blue Serengeti, where she starts with the Cape in 1975 and Spielberg's imagery, and she goes on to contrast the way in which the shark is shown in Jaws with the life of sharks as predators in their natural environment, and a lot of very beautiful and majestic footage of the great white sharks off the coast of California that come to Año Nuevo, the Farallones, and that we have in our backyard. And I guess my concluding question is, much as we love these images and much as they're pleasurable, what do they obscure and distort about our relation to ocean reality as much as they reveal?
So what you're saying is that while its dramatic effect, brings in audiences, sometimes it distorts the reality of what's going on in the ocean. Yes, we've had multiple speakers come and talk to us about the fact that sharks represented a really important component to the oceanic ecosystem. And so, great, this is fascinating. Tell me about early pictures that were influential to your life, that you as a would-be college professor, when did you first get interested in film in general? What are the early movies that you saw? So
the real answer is I grew up watching independent American cinema because my mother was involved in the scene around avant-garde independent American film in the 1960s and 1970s. And I went back to the classics, actually, at the silent screen. I don't know how interesting that is for your audience, films like Fayyad's Vampires, The Surrealists, so very abstract films. I do remember Jaws. I spent a lot of time in the water as a kid in Long Island Sound, so I wasn't particularly worried by Jaws because, I was used to the jellyfish and the seaweed and poking around for scallops with a scuba mask and didn't really care too much about these kind of over-the-top images.
Can you remember what was the first movie you can remember seeing?
I remember Downhill Racer, but I must have seen movies before that. I remember Grand Prix. These are drive-in movies we used to go to in the summers.
Who is your favorite movie director now?
Well, I just taught Citizen Kane, and I have to say Orson Welles is truly a brilliant, amazing director, and Stanley Kubrick has to also rank among my very favorite directors just for their mastery of artistry. I also love the underwater films that Cameron has done. I have a big sequence on The Abyss in my book because it's so brilliant in its evocation of a kind of surrealist and imaginative quality of the depths, along with their terror.
So thanks very much for helping us understand how underwater filmmaking has created these iconically terrifying images in the lexicon of filmmaking.
I emphasize the horror, but there's also a lot of beauty. So if you look at the dance between the creature and the Kay, the scientist assistant in Creature from the Black Lagoon, that's an entrancing sequence. And it can also be read as a sequence of a kind of unrequited longing that will inspire Guillermo del Toro in The Shape of Water. So there would be a lot to say, and I do say in my book, about the magic and the enchantment that's possible underwater, as well as the horror. I guess I emphasize the horror because I feel going into the summer, it's sort of a fun thing to spend time on. But
Well, Margaret, this is so fascinating listening to your subject. Thanks so much for your fascinating presentation. Thanks for being a guest on the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
thank you so much. It was really a great pleasure and a great honor.
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.